Welcome back. Let's continue to this now. In a remarkable wildlife rescue operation, 84 vultures have been saved after a mass poisoning incident in Kruger National Park. Now, the poisoning linked to poachers targeted an elephant carcass with toxic pesticides was uncovered thanks to the Endangered Wildlife Trust surveillance system. A swift response by SANParks rangers and EWT officials helped rescue the birds. Now, this tragic event highlights the ongoing battle against wildlife poaching and the devastating impact it has on ecosystems. To speak more on this, let's now welcome John Davies, Project Coordinator at the Endangered Wildlife Trust. John, a very good afternoon to you. So there is some good news to this tragic event, but it also continues to point the ongoing battle against wildlife poaching and its impact, doesn't it?
It's one of the sort of sad realities. I mean, you go through these phases where we have slight improvements in the situation, and then, you have a massive setback like this. And it really is a tragic thing in terms of vulture conservation, not just within the Kruger Park and surrounds, but, on a much larger scale than that.
So the rescue of these 84 vultures is being attributed to the EWT's surveillance system. Just speak to us about how that unfolded.
So it's a bit of an interesting story that almost more started from a research perspective, but the Endangered Wildlife Trust relies on GPS tracking technology for vultures, not just within the Lowveld and eastern South Africa, but throughout a large swathe of the African continent. So vultures fitted with solar power tracking units that will last up to 10 years allow us an opportunity to understand their movements. And as you can imagine, fencing and normal approaches to protected areas don't really work with birds that cover 150 kilometers a day at times. So whenever one of these tracking units shows that a bird isn't moving in a predicted way or might be too static for too long, it automates a system that sends information to key personnel, and that allows us to flag a location with GPS cohorts and react to that in, well, not quite real time, but as close as possible.
Yeah, and I mean, we know that poachers have, different modus operandi depending on what animal they're looking for. Help us unpack this particular incident in which they used poisoning.
So it's interesting because it seems to be a very, shall I say, under-recorded or something that doesn't really reach the media in a big way, the use of poisons. But for a lot of species, it is a fairly common poaching practice. I think there's a lot of, obviously, media attention on species like rhino, which I don't want to detract from that at all. But poisoning in this instance is very effective when it means that birds from a large area feed on carcasses, and vultures are incredibly efficient at finding these locations.
Yeah.
And it's also very closely tied into the poaching of large carnivores like lions, which is still ongoing. And often what tends to happen is vultures are sort of caught in the crossfire in many ways, and finding these poisoned carcasses before the intended victims, if I can put it that way, actually find the carcasses.
Yeah, so these 84 vultures have now been saved. What happens to them? I would imagine it is a coordinated effort with, Endangered Wildlife Trust as well as the SANParks.
Absolutely. So, it extends well beyond that. So we also work very closely with the Moholoholo Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. And even currently, just before this interview, we were moving some of the first birds to outside enclosures. But fortunately, over the last few years, we've worked quite hard at treatment protocols, and we're sitting at a success rate of about 96% for the survival of these birds. At this point, we're already looking at potentially releasing the first few birds on Monday. We'll, honestly, just before this interview, we moved the first few out. So we'll look at how well they're feeding, how well they're flying, and once we're comfortable with that, then those birds get released. But fortunately, vultures are incredibly tough animals, and they tend to make quite good recoveries. And we expect that at least 90-95% of the birds we would hope to release within the next 2 weeks.
Just from a public perspective, how can people get involved? I mean, particularly when you start talking about things that are untoward, when we speak of poaching, what should we look out for and then get involved?
It's quite a tricky one to actually answer in terms of how the public can be involved. But I mean, one of the important things is to become advocates for vulture conservation. We see so much attention for many species and things out there, and vultures, I understand, are not always the most beautiful, the most loved animals. I would feel very differently about that. But I think it's important for people to appreciate the role that they fill within an ecosystem. But also, whenever we're working with conservation organizations in particular, say, speak to people if there's unusual behavior. If you see a vulture that's not flying properly, don't be shy to contact, the EWT, SANParks, whoever is relevant within that landscape. Efficient communication goes a long way to actually achieving better results and responses to these incidents.
And speak to us very quickly as we wrap our conversation about, vultures and how, good they are and the impact they have on the ecosystem.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, I understand we always kind of say they're quite undervalued species. But if you imagine what they do, we jokingly kind of call them the cleanup crew of the ecosystem. And there really aren't any other species that can replace them or fill the void if we do lose them. You can imagine, carnivores even relying on them to find feeding opportunities and the impact that has. One of the main things that's often stated is their role in reducing the spread of disease. You can imagine a disease like anthrax, for example, the impact that has on other species. If you have a healthy vulture population, that gets controlled. And this extends to people as well when it comes to livestock outside of protected areas, which these birds will readily feed on. So they really are invaluable in what they do on a massive landscape throughout the continent.
Absolutely. John, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. John Davies, Project Coordinator at the Endangered Wildlife Trust.